So, that's obnoxious. Go away. Cool. So our lecture today, or this afternoon, is on authentication and cookies and how we use cookies to authenticate and how we get this custom environment that we have when we log into sites on the internet. And what this process of logging in even means. Because we had to kind of hack HTTP to get that sort of functionality. And I'm going to show you how we did that now. So we're going to talk HTTP more. And also, like I say, whenever we're talking HTTP, I'm also kind of including HTTPS there as well. Both of these protocols function the same. The only real difference is, HTTPS is using that secure socket layer instead of just regular socket. Okay, we're going to talk about authentication. We're going to talk about cookies and sessions. These are kind of like two halves of the same coin. And let's go through. So HTTP, what we already know about it is like what was told to me this morning, what you guys already told me. It's an application layer protocol, right? It's mostly for a messaging protocol. You're sending data and you're sending metadata associated with that data, right? We have the requests and the responses, and in those requests and responses, we have those headers, those header fields that we've started to learn and started to manipulate around. It specifies what data is allowed, specifies the content of the messages. But the thing about HTTP is it doesn't tell you how the messages are transmitted, right? It doesn't say you have to use TCP/IP to send these messages. All it says is one request, one response, get, post, put, server or client server architecture, right? That's what HTTP says. Doesn't specify how it has to get sent. It just says this is the language we're going to be using. And one more thing here that's new is that it's stateless. It doesn't remember any of the previous requests and responses. And that last part should be the part that's like, what do you mean by that? How can it be stateless? I'm logged into this website. I refresh the page. I'm still logged into this website. How are you telling me that a server forgets everything? Well, let's go see, right? This is the most important part about this lecture today. HTTP is stateless. I want you to think, if you've seen the movie 50 First Dates, server, once the server sends its response, it's completely forgotten about you as a client, right? Them's just the breaks. So how do we get around this? How do we have a way to log in and stay logged in and like actually have websites? So we're going to go to another set of acronyms here. Just like we had CIA, which is the big, the top level of what our role is, right? Confidentiality, integrity, availability. Underneath that, we have AAA, which is really a framework for controlling access to things. Right? If we want to control access to things, we're always going to try and keep these three pillars of controlling access in mind. So authentication, right? Are you who you say you are? Authorization, are you allowed to do the thing that you're trying to do? And then, regardless of any of this, are we keeping track of everything? Are we keeping track of any of these requests that are being made for, are we keeping track of any of these authentication requests? Are we keeping track of all of this stuff, right? So this framework, these are the three pillars you want to keep in mind, when you're talking about controlling access to resources. Okay, so let's talk about how we do authentication over the web. Right, we've seen this sort of slide, right? How you can log in and how you would sign up when you create an account, right? You have some forms that you fill out, your name, your address, the password. You hit send. When you hit send, you're making a request. Your browser makes a request that goes off into the server. Server interprets the request. It's like, okay, this is a post. We're making a user. Here's their password. We'll save it in the database. Okay. And then when you want to go log in again, you have to type in your password. You hit send, right? And it goes to the database. But here's the main issue, right? We need to authenticate them if we're going to give them something customized, right? I need to make sure you are who you say you are if I'm going to give you something for you specifically. right? But if you guys have all used the internet, you don't have to authenticate. You don't have to put in your username and password every time you want a resource, right? This is not the case. We don't have to authenticate every time. So how is it that we get around this? How do we stay logged in? Okay, this is the idea we're trying to get around here. How is it that we're able to stay logged in when HTTP as a protocol by itself does not allow for it, right? Well, it's a very easy physical analog for you to understand this. Okay, we've all seen a situation like this before, hopefully, maybe back in the past when you might go to large events and you had heavy winter coats. You would drop off your coat at a coat check and you would get a ticket. Right? Now that you have your ticket, once you want your coat, all you need to do is give back your ticket. And that's how you authenticate back and you get your coat. Same idea here. That's what cookies are. Okay. All a cookie is a small text file that's going to live on your machine. And it's going to have some information. That cookie, when you think of cookies, I want you to think it's your ticket from Code Check. That is the same idea here. So let's talk about how this actually looks over HTTP. Again, HTTP, I got my client, I got my server. The internet's going to facilitate the transfer of information. So what's going to happen? I make a request. I'm the client. I make a request, send it through the internet to the server. Server generates a response, sends it back to the client. This is the old way, right? How are we going to do it with cookies? How do we get persistence? I make a request, send it through the internet to the server. Server attaches a cookie to my response, sends that over to me as the client. My browser knows what to do with these cookies. And now when I send a new request over to the server, that request is going to have a cookie attached to it. It's going to have my cookie attached to it. And then the server will do something with that cookie. Hopefully, customize my content, make it so it knows I'm logged in, whatever else. This is why if you've ever gone through your browser and deleted all your cookies, you're logged out of all of your web apps. This is why. The server doesn't have that way of authenticating you anymore. Okay. Send the response, get your cookie. All right, cookies and sessions. Now, every request you make, you don't have to be authenticated any longer because we're going to use these cookies. They're like your proxy for identification. Okay, so here's the big advantage. You don't have to authenticate every request. The server can take a look at the cookie and keep track of if you're logged in or not. So let's talk about the other half of this, the sessions half. This is like how the server actually kind of keeps track of everything. So the client here, again, going to make a request. We send it to the server. Server is going to make what's called a server session. Think of it as a database. It's going to keep track of this ticket belongs to this user and all their information about that user. We'll kind of keep it like that. And if you're a bank, right, maybe you don't want you've probably noticed you get logged out of banks like within 5 minutes of not doing anything, within 10 minutes of no activity, something like that. On the server side, right, they're keeping track of all this and they're saying, well, if this user hasn't done anything in X amount of time, we'll destroy the session and then they're not logged in anymore, sort of thing. If they want to log in, they'll have to re-authenticate. So anyway, this is the session is how the server keeps track of who is, how it keeps track of its persistence of who's been reaching out to it. So we make the server session. The server, again, makes its response, attaches the cookie to the response, sends it back to the client. Client does whatever it needs to do with the content, make another request. You're going to keep that cookie with you, right? The cookie is like your ID. So it knows it's like a temporary ID. Anyway, once my new request with a cookie goes to the server is going to say, hey, there's a cookie on this request. Let's look up the information we have. And so it looks up the session information, sends the response with whatever is appropriate for it, right? Maybe it's my custom settings when I'm logged in or something like that. Cool. Let's look at this again, slightly more detail. just so that you have your bearing straight. Now my server is on my left side and the client is on my right side as I'm looking at it. And we have the internet in the middle. Right? So we have the server, we have the client. Looks like we're going to yourapp.com. Okay, so I make a request for the cookie store app, right? Yourapp.com. Make the request. Let's take a look at what that HTTP request will look like in a little bit more detail. We should have seen some requests, right, today that kind of look like this. It's a GET request. It's a GET request for slash, right? So just, yourapp.com. And we're using the HTTP protocol 1.1. Okay. We have some headers in there. We got the host header, we got the accept header, we got that user agent header, right? All of the metadata associated with me to get that request. Right? And the one thing I do want you to notice is we have no cookie. First time, there's no cookie. Okay. So there's my purple diamond request. I send my request to the server, the back end. Right. So what are we going to do? The server now has to read and interpret the request. So you can imagine you could write like Python code, right? If not cookie in header request, something like that. I guarantee you there's server code that looks like that. And they look to check, say, hey, is there a cookie here? Looks like there's no cookie. So let's make a session for them. All right, let's keep some information. Okay. So me as the server, I start making my green diamond response. This is what my response is going to look like, right? HTTP response. It's at the first line. We're saying what version of HTTP it is. We're saying 200 response, it's okay. And then there's some headers associated with a response. And then if you look at the bottom, you have the body of the response, right? We have the HTML. We have a tag for the HTML to go pull up some of the rest of the JavaScript for the rest of the app and all the regular goodies that we need, that my browser needs so that I can use, whatever this cookie app is. Okay. So this is what happens when we add the cookie. We have our session ID. What we're going to do is before we send that response, we're going to add one more header. There is a response header called set cookie. And there you go. You have the cookie right there. It's saved as a key value pair. We love key value pairs. And it says my UID equals something like this. If you take a look at your cookies, you'll probably see things that look kind of similar. Right? Cool. So what happens now? There's my response. It has the set cookie flag attached to it, right? The server is doing its thing. It makes its session store, right? It attaches that tag with the user that's associated with it. Right now I'm using my cat nar. And then the response goes back, or it goes to the client. The client looks at it, right? It's got its headers. It's like 200. Okay, cool. It has a header that says set cookie. Well, it says, okay, your browser knows what to do with it. It's going to save that cookie into its cookie jar, into its text files. Okay. So it reads the cookie, says, awesome, I got a cookie. I'm going to put this in my cookie storage. Okay. So the HTML, that goes into my browser. I have my cookie storage right there. Boom. Right. So now let's say I make a new request back to the cookie store app. I'm going to attach in the header cookie. Here's my cookie header. It's the same thing the server gave back to me, just like if I had a coat check ticket. All right, so send that cookie over, send that attached cookie. All right, send the request over to the server. Server interprets, reads through the HTTP request, right? There must be some line of code that says like if cookie in HTTP request. Says there is. Cool, we got a cookie. What do we got to do with it? We're going to look it up. So it looks it up in its session store. Must be this user. It's that user that came back, right? So the idea here, everyone gets a session, right? We're logging into web pages. You get a session. Everyone is getting their sessions. And then here's a picture of my cat because I figured that'd be useful. So questions, let's ask them.